There's a particular kind of mental noise that follows you everywhere, not loud enough for others to hear, but persistent enough to color everything you do. It's the voice that tells you stories about what could go wrong, what you're not good enough for, what others are probably thinking about you. It replays embarrassing moments from years ago as if they happened yesterday. It rehearses worst-case scenarios for situations that may never occur. It compares your inner struggles to everyone else's polished exteriors. And slowly, quietly, without you even realizing it, this voice starts to feel less like chatter and more like truth. You wake up with it, whispering doubts about the day ahead. You carry it with you through conversations, constantly monitoring for signs of rejection or judgment. You lie down with it at night, reviewing every mistake, every awkward moment, every opportunity you might have missed. It's exhausting to live with this constant commentary, this internal critic that never seems to rest, never seems satisfied, never seems to offer the peace it promises once you've fixed everything it claims is wrong. But here's what most people don't realize about these thought patterns. They're not actually about the specific things your mind says they're about. They're not really about your appearance or your performance or what someone said to you last week. They're about something deeper, a fundamental misunderstanding about the relationship between you and your thoughts, between your worth and your mental activity, between who you are and what your mind produces moment by moment. You've been living as if you are your thoughts, as if every story your mind tells, every worry it generates, every criticism it offers is a reflection of reality rather than simply mental activity. You've been treating your thoughts like facts rather than events, like permanent truths rather than temporary weather patterns moving through the landscape of your awareness. And this misunderstanding has turned your own mind into something that feels like an adversary rather than an ally. This isn't your fault. You weren't taught the difference between having thoughts and being consumed by them. You weren't shown how to relate to mental activity without becoming identified with it. Instead, you learned to take your thoughts seriously, to believe them, to respond to them as if they were always accurate assessments of reality. And over time, this created a pattern where your mind became a source of suffering rather than a tool for navigating life. The cycle works like this. A thought arises. Maybe it's worry about an upcoming event, or self-criticism about something you said, or comparison to someone who seems to have their life together. Instead of recognizing this as just mental activity, you believe the thought. You buy into it. You start building evidence for why it might be true. You look for confirmations in your environment, in your memories, in your interpretations of other people's behavior. And before you know it, you're not just having a worried thought. You've become a worried person. You're not just noticing self-criticism. You've become someone who fundamentally believes they're flawed. This pattern is incredibly common, yet it remains largely invisible because thoughts feel so intimate, so personal, so much like you. It's hard to step back and see them clearly. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The very thing you're using to observe is the thing you're trying to observe. And so, most people spend their entire lives identified with their mental activity, never recognizing that there's a part of them, the awareness that notices thoughts, that remains untouched by whatever the mind produces. The hidden cost of living this way extends far beyond just feeling bad sometimes. It affects every aspect of your life because it changes how you see yourself, others, and your possibilities. When you're caught in cycles of self-defeating thoughts, you start making decisions based on fears that exist only in your mind. You avoid opportunities because your thoughts tell you stories about failure. You hold back in relationships because your mind generates narratives about rejection. You play small because your internal voice convinces you that's safer than risking disappointment. This doesn't just impact major life decisions. It affects moment-to-moment experiences too. You miss the beauty of a sunset because you're rehearsing tomorrow's difficult conversation. You can't fully enjoy time with friends because part of your attention is occupied with analyzing their words for hidden meanings. You struggle to feel pride in your accomplishments because your mind immediately shifts to what you didn't do perfectly or what someone else might have done better. Over time, this creates a particular kind of loneliness, the loneliness of never being fully present with your own life, of always being pulled away from direct experience by mental commentary about that experience, of living at a remove from the richness and texture of actual moments because so much of your attention is absorbed in the stories your mind tells about those moments. But perhaps the most painful cost is how it affects your relationship with yourself. When you're identified with self-defeating thought patterns, you start to believe that the harsh voice in your head is your own voice. You lose touch with the parts of yourself that are naturally wise, compassionate, and clear. You forget that beneath all the mental noise, there's a deeper knowing that doesn't need to think its way to truth. It simply recognizes it. What makes this pattern so stubborn is that it often masquerades as something helpful. Your mind convinces you that constant worry is preparation, that harsh self-criticism is motivation, that rehearsing worst-case scenarios is protection. It sells you the story that if you just think about things enough, analyze them thoroughly enough, you'll finally figure out how to be safe, successful, and approved of by everyone who matters. But thinking your way out of thought patterns is like trying to dig yourself out of a hole. The very tool you're using to solve the problem is what created the problem in the first place. The solution doesn't lie in better thoughts or more positive thinking or figuring out the right way to think. It lies in understanding the nature of thought itself and your relationship to it. There's a wisdom that doesn't get talked about enough in our problem-solving culture. It's the recognition that you are not your thoughts. You are the space in which thoughts arise. You are the awareness that notices mental activity. And this awareness, this essential you, is never actually disturbed by the content of thoughts, no matter how compelling or distressing they might seem. Just as the sky is never permanently changed by the weather that moves through it, your essential nature remains untouched by the mental weather that passes through your consciousness. This isn't just a philosophical concept. It's something you can discover directly through experience. Right now, notice that you're aware of reading these words. Notice that you're aware of whatever thoughts might be arising as you read. That awareness, the one doing the noticing, isn't thinking about anything. It's simply present, simply aware. And it's the same awareness that's been with you your entire life, the constant backdrop against which all mental activity plays out. When you begin to recognize this distinction Between the awareness that you are and the thoughts that move through that awareness, everything changes. Thoughts don't stop arising, but they stop defining you. Mental activity continues, but it no longer controls your sense of self or your emotional state. You begin to relate to thoughts the way you might relate to clouds in the sky or sounds in the environment, as temporary phenomena that come and go without fundamentally affecting your well-being. This shift doesn't happen through thinking about it or understanding it intellectually. It happens through direct experience, through moments of stepping back from mental activity and recognizing the spacious awareness in which it's all occurring. Sometimes this happens naturally, in moments of beauty, in meditation, in deep absorption in an activity you love. But it can also be cultivated through simple practices that help you disengage from identification with thought. One of the most powerful practices is simply observing thoughts without believing them or trying to change them. When you notice your mind generating a self-defeating story, instead of getting caught up in whether it's true or false, right or wrong, you can step back and notice. Interesting. My mind is telling a story about failure right now. This isn't suppression or denial, it's recognition. You're not trying to stop the thought or replace it with a better one. You're simply seeing it clearly as mental activity rather than truth. Another practice is paying attention to the space between thoughts. Notice that thoughts don't arise continuously. There are gaps, pauses, moments of quiet between them. In those gaps, you can sense the awareness that's always present, the space that holds all mental activity. The more you become familiar with this space, the less identified you become with the content that moves through it. Physical practices can help too. When you're caught in a cycle of self-defeating thoughts, sometimes the most direct path to freedom is through the body. Take a deep breath and feel your feet on the ground. Step outside and notice the temperature of the air on your skin. Move your body in some way. Stretch, walk, dance. These simple actions can interrupt the hypnotic quality of thought and remind you that you exist in physical reality, not just in the mental realm, where most self-defeating cycles operate. What's remarkable is how quickly your experience can shift once you stop feeding the cycle. When you stop believing every story your mind tells, stop arguing with thoughts, stop trying to think your way out of thinking, there's often an immediate sense of relief. Not because your problems have been solved or your thoughts have become more positive, but because you've stepped out of the boxing ring where you were fighting with your own mental activity. This creates space for something different to emerge. Instead of being driven by the fear-based stories of the thinking mind, you start to access deeper sources of guidance, intuition, wisdom, creative insight. You begin to make decisions from a clearer place, one that's not clouded by mental noise. You start to respond to life from presence, rather than reacting from thought patterns that may have nothing to do with current reality. Your relationships change too. When you're not constantly absorbed in mental commentary about yourself and others, you become more available for genuine connection. You listen more fully because you're not simultaneously having an internal conversation about what you're going to say next. You can be with people more authentically because you're not constantly monitoring your thoughts about how you're being perceived. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to discover who you are beneath all the mental activity. You start to taste the peace that's always been there, hidden under layers of thinking. You recognize the love that doesn't depend on having positive thoughts about yourself. You access the creativity that flows naturally when it's not constantly interrupted by mental editing and criticism. This doesn't mean you'll never have difficult thoughts again. The mind will continue to produce all kinds of mental activity. That's what minds do. But you'll relate to that activity differently. Instead of being at its mercy, you'll be able to use it when it's helpful and ignore it when it's not. Instead of your mind being your master, it becomes your servant, a useful tool that you can employ when needed and set aside when it's not serving you. The freedom this brings is profound. Not freedom from having thoughts, but freedom from being enslaved by them. Not freedom from mental activity, but freedom within it. The recognition that no matter what your mind produces, the essential you, the awareness that notices all of it, remains untouched, unharmed, fundamentally okay. This understanding transforms suffering from something that seems permanent and personal into something that's clearly temporary and impersonal. You realize that self-defeating thought cycles aren't evidence of something wrong with you. They're just weather patterns in consciousness that will inevitably change if you stop reinforcing them with your attention and belief. And in that recognition, your mind begins to work with you rather than against you. Not because you've trained it to think better thoughts, but because you've stopped mistaking its activity for your identity. You've stepped back into the awareness that you've always been, the awareness that's large enough to hold all thoughts without being disturbed by any of them. So, if something in this video resonated with you, if you caught even a glimpse of the space between you and your thoughts, leave a comment with the word aware. Just that one word. Let it be a reminder that you are the awareness noticing your mental activity, not the mental activity itself. That beneath all the noise, there's a quiet knowing that's never been confused, never been broken, never needed fixing. And if these words feel like something you need to remember, subscribe to this channel. There's more here for you. Not strategies for better thinking, but invitations to step back from thinking altogether and discover the peace that's been waiting there all along. The peace of knowing who you really are beneath all the stories your mind tells about who you should be.